tests because they use many different pieces of code together. So we'll start by creating unit tests for format money. So we're going to go to this money.js file, and beside this file, we're going to create a new file for the tests. And we'll name it the same, money, but this time we'll end with .test.js. So the naming convention is to put it beside the original file and end it with .test.js. Now inside this test file, at the top we'll import curly brackets it from a string v-test. So it lets us create a test. And we'll also import the format money function from a string and import it from this file, ./money. And now to create our first test, we're going to use it and brackets, and we'll give this a string. So this creates a test, and the string here is the name of the test. So this describes what we are testing. So let's give it a name like formats 1999 cents as $19.99. If we run format money with 1999, it should give us $19.99 as the result. So this name is describing what we want to test. And a naming convention is to make this read like English. For example, it formats 1999 as 19.99. And then we're going to give this a function, brackets, arrow, and curly brackets. And in here, we're going to test if format money works correctly. To do that, we're also going to import expect from v-test. So expect lets us check if the result is correct. So in here, we're going to run expect and brackets. And in here, we put the code that we want to test. For example, let's put the code format money brackets and 1999. And then expect has different methods that we can use to check this result. One method is called .to_b and brackets. So in this second bracket, we can put the expected result of this code. So we said that the expected result should be this string here. So we'll give it $19.99. So this code tests if this value is equal to this value. If they are equal, this check has passed. If they are not equal, this check has failed. And then expect is going to send this result to v-test. And v-test will display a summary of what passed and what failed. So now let's run this test. We're going to save this file. And then in our command line, we're going to create a new tab for running the tests. And first, we have to be inside the e-commerce project folder. So we'll cd e-commerce-project. And we're going to run npx v-test. So v-test is going to search our code for all the files that end with .test.js and runs the tests inside. And then it displays the result in the command line. So this tells us that our format money test here has passed. Now let's create another test for format money. We'll go back to this test file. And to create another test, we're just going to use it again and a string. And remember that we had some problems with money not showing 2 decimals. So let's test if it displays 2 decimals and give it a function. And now inside here, we can run expect and brackets, format money, brackets, and let's give it a value that might not show two decimals, like 1090. And then we'll check if this is correct using dot to b and brackets and a string. And the expected result of this code should be $10.90. So we're going to check if this result is equal to this result. If we save, VTest is actually watching our files for changes. So when we save, it will automatically rerun our tests. And now you can see we have two tests that passed. Next, inside each test, we can have multiple checks. So in here, let's add another check using expect, brackets, and let's try format money, brackets with a different value, like 100. So we expect this to be $1.00. So we'll do dot to b brackets $1.00 and save. Now VTest will rerun all of our tests, and now you can see that both tests still passed. So when we have multiple checks like this, all of the checks have to pass in order for this test to pass. If one of these checks fails, the entire test will fail and it will show up here. So as a quick example, if I change this and save, one of these checks failed, so we can see that this test has failed. So I'm going to add it back and save. Next, if we look at our file here, notice that these tests are related to the format money function. A best practice is to group these tests together. To do that, at the top, we're also going to import describe from VTest. So describe groups tests together. We call a group of tests a test suite. So above these tests, we're going to use the code describe and brackets, and we'll give this a string. And this is the name of the test suite or the group of tests. So these tests are for the format money function. And we'll give it a function, brackets, arrow, and curly brackets. And we're going to move our tests inside. So we'll select it and cut and paste and save. And everything still passes. And we can see the test suite name over here. So test suites basically help us keep our tests more organized. If we want to test a different function inside this file, we would create another test suite and group our tests in there. So a best practice is to always put our tests inside a test suite, even if we only have one test suite. So now let's save this into Git. We're going to go to the Git section, and let's use the message, create unit tests for format money, and commit. Next, we'll create another type of test called an integration test. Integration test means we test multiple units or pieces of code working together. For example, if we look at our files and we open the product component, testing a component would be considered an integration test. Notice this uses multiple pieces of code, like the format money function and the load cart function. So now let's create tests for this file. Beside product.js, we're going to create a new file, and we'll name it product.test.jsx. So we end with .jsx this time because this will let us use component syntax in this file, like this. So first, let's actually copy the imports from our money test file because we're going to be using these again. So we'll copy, and in here, we'll paste. But this time, we're going to import the product component from the ./product file. And first, we're going to create a test suite. So we use describe, brackets, and a string. And we're going to be testing the product component. And give this a function. And inside, we'll create our first integration test using it, brackets, and a string. And for components, the first thing we can check is if the component is displayed correctly. So for the product component, we can check if the name is correct, the image is correct, and so on. So we'll name this test it displays the product details correctly. And we'll give it a function. And now inside here, how do we check if this component displayed the details correctly? So when testing a function, we run the function and check the result. When testing a component, we render the component and check the result. So render means to display the component on the page. To render the component in our tests, we need to add some more npm packages. So we're going to go to our command line. And right now, vtest is watching all of our files for changes. So we're going to stop vtest using Control-C, or you can press Q to quit. And now, we're going to click this link in the description, go to lesson 9, and we're going to install all of these npm packages that we need. So we're going to select this and copy. And then in our command line, we're going to paste this command. And press Enter to install all these packages. After installing, we also need to create some config files to test our components. So we'll go to our files, and we'll scroll down and find vite.config.js and click it. And we're going to create a new file and name this vtest.config.js. And we'll click this link in the description and go to lesson 9. We're going to copy this setup code. So we're going to select this and copy. And then in here, we'll paste that code. And save. And we're also going to create another file beside this. So here, create a new file called setup, capital T, tests.js. And we'll click the link in the description again and go to lesson 9. And we're going to copy this code and paste it in here. And save. So that's just some setup that we need to do. If we look at this config file, you don't have to worry too much about how this works. This is just some standard setup. These two are required for component tests or integration tests to work. And this basically runs the code inside this file before all of our tests. So in this file, we import just DOM, and this basically adds a bunch of methods to expect to help us test components. Now that we have the setup, we're going to go back to our test. And at the top, we're going to import, curly brackets, render from the package at testing-library/React. So this renders or displays a component in a fake web page, specifically for testing. Inside our test, we're going to use the render function and brackets. And we'll tell it to render the product component using less than product slash greater than. So next, the product component has some props. So we need to provide these props in our test. So in here, we're going to add the prop product equals curly brackets. And we're going to provide a sample product to test with. To do that, in our files, we're going to go to the starting code folder and open the data folder and open products.js. And here we have a bunch of sample products that we can use. So let's just select the first product and copy it. And then in our test, we're going to save the sample product in a variable const product equals and paste. And we're going to take this product and save it as the product prop. Next, we also need to provide a load cart function to this component. So in our app, load cart actually contacts the backend. However, in our tests, we should not contact a real backend because the backend might not be available during tests, and our tests might accidentally update real data. So instead, a best practice is to mock this function in our tests. Mock means to create a fake version of this function. To create a mock, at the top, we're going to import vi from vtest. And we'll scroll back down and we'll create const load cart equals vi.fn and brackets. So vi.fn basically creates a fake function that doesn't do anything. So this fake function is called a mock. And we're going to give this mock to the component. So here, we'll create a prop load cart equals curly bracket and our mock load cart. And this will prevent our component from accidentally contacting the backend in our tests. And that's it. This will render the product component on a fake web page. So now, how do we check if this component was displayed correctly? We can't see the fake web page, but we can check it using our code. To do that, we're going to scroll up and we'll also import the screen from testing library /React. So screen lets us check the screen or the fake web page to see if everything was rendered correctly. In our test, after we render the component, we're going to use screen and the method .getByText and brackets. So this searches the screen or the fake web page for an element with a specific text. So we'll give it a string. And first, let's check if the product name is displayed correctly. So we'll scroll up and we're going to copy this product name. And then in here, we're going to paste. And this will search the screen or the fake web page for an element with this text inside. So now we're going to check if this element exists. That will tell us if we displayed the correct product on the page. To do that, before this code, we'll use expect and open bracket, and at the end, a close bracket, and we'll use the method .to be in the document and brackets. So this method is added by testing library /JEST-DOM. And this checks if this element exists on the screen or on the fake web page. So now let's save and we'll run this test using vtest. In the command line, we'll run npx vtest. And all of our tests passed. Next, let's add some more checks to this test. So let's also check if the price was displayed correctly. So here, we'll add another expect brackets, and we'll use screen.getByText and a string, and we're going to search for the price on the screen. So for the sample product, the price should be $10.90. So we'll scroll down and search for $10.90 on the screen, and we expect this dot to be in the document and brackets. And save, and Vite will rerun the test and tell us that this passed. Next, let's check if the product image is correct. So down here, we'll use another expect brackets, screen, dot, but this time we can't use getByText because we're trying to find an image. Instead, we're going to add a test ID to the image element. So in our files, we'll open the product component, and we're going to scroll down until we find the product image here. And for this element, we're going to add an attribute data-test ID equals a string product-image. So this ID lets us find the image element in our tests. We could also use the class name to find this element, but if we change our class name, it will break the test. To avoid this, we usually use an ID specifically for testing, like this. So now let's save, and in our test, we'll use screen.getByTestID and brackets, and a string, and the test ID product-image. So this will give us the image element in the product component. Now let's check if this image element's source attribute is equal to the product's image up here. So we'll select this image and copy, and then down here, dot to have attribute, brackets, and we'll check the source attribute if it's equal to the string, and paste the image from our sample product, and save. VTest will rerun our tests, and everything passed. So we know we're displaying the correct image. Next, let's check the ratings image and the rating count. Feel free to pause if you want to try it yourself first. So first, we'll do expect, open bracket, the screen dot, and we'll check the ratings image first. So we'll go to the product component, and we're going to scroll down until we find the image product rating stars, and we'll give this a data-test ID equals product rating stars image, and save. And let's just select this test ID and copy, and in our test, we'll get by test ID brackets, a string, and paste. And we expect this dot to have attribute, brackets, the source attribute equals a string, and we'll go back to the product component, and let's just copy the source attribute here. So we'll select it and copy, and inside our test, we're going to paste. Now for our sample product, we have a rating of 4.5. So that means we take 4.5 and multiply it by 10. We're going to get the value 45. And this is the rating image that should be displayed on the page. So we'll save, and VTest tells us everything passed. Finally, let's check the rating count. So we'll expect brackets, screen, dot, and this time we're looking for text. So we can just use get by text, brackets, and for this sample product, the count is 87. So we'll look for the string 87. And we expect this dot to be in the document and save. VTest will rerun and everything passed. So now we tested if the product component displayed all the details correctly. So let's save this into Git. We'll open the Git section and we'll use the message create integration test for product component and commit. Next, we're going to test user interactions. In the product component, we have an add to cart button. We can also test clicking this add to cart button to see if it behaves correctly. So in our test file, let's create a new test using it, brackets, and a string, and let's name it adds a product to the cart and give it a function. So first, let's render the product component again. So we'll scroll up and let's just copy all of this code. So we'll select it to here and copy. And then in our second test, we're going to paste. So this sets up the sample product and the mock, and then renders the product component again. So now that we rendered this, how do we click the add to cart button in our test? Earlier, we installed a package called testing library/user event. This package lets us simulate events like clicking a button. So at the top of our test, we're going to scroll up and we'll import user event from the package at testing-library/user-event. So this lets us simulate events like a click. So now we'll scroll back down to our test. And first, we need to set up user event using const user equals user event dot setup and brackets. So now we can simulate events using user dot click. So this simulates a click event, and inside the brackets, we're going to tell it which element to click. So we want it to click the add to cart button. So first, we need to get the add to cart button inside our test. We'll go to our files, and in the product component, let's scroll down to the add to cart button, and we're going to give this a data-test ID equals a string add to cart button. And let's select this test ID and copy and save. And then in the product test, we're going to get the button using screen.get by test ID brackets and a string, and we'll paste the test ID. So this will get the add to cart button from the screen. So let's save it in a variable, const add to cart button equals, and we're going to give this to user.click, add to cart button. Next, when we click this button, it takes some time for the page to process the click. So user.click takes some time to finish. That means this is asynchronous code, and it returns a promise. To wait for this to finish, at the front, we're going to use await. And remember, to use await, we need to be inside an async function. So above, in this function, we're going to make it async. And we'll scroll back down. And now, once we click the Add to Cart button, this is going to make a request to the backend using axios.post. But remember, in our tests, we should not contact a real backend because we might accidentally update real data. So earlier, we mocked load cart and replaced it with a fake function. Now, we're also going to mock Axios, so we can actually mock an entire NPM package. To do that, at the top, we're going to use the code vi.mock brackets and the string Axios. So this mocks the entire Axios package. This means that when we are testing, when we import from Axios, we will get a fake version of Axios instead. So when we click Add to Cart, it will use the fake version of Axios, and it will do nothing. It will not contact the backend. So now, what should we test? We can still test that our code ran axios.post, and we can test if we gave axios.post the correct values. To do that, at the top, we're also going to import Axios from the package Axios. And because of vi.mock, this is a fake version of Axios. So now we can scroll back down. And after we click Add to Cart, we can expect brackets axios.post. If we give a mock to expect, we can check if our code ran axios.post and if we gave it the correct values using the method to have been called with and brackets. So we expect our code to call axios.post with /API/cart items. So in here, we'll check if the first value we gave it was /API/cart-items. And we also expect our code to give axios.post an object with a product ID and a quantity. So in here, we can also check if we gave it an object with a product ID : and we're going to get the product ID of our sample product. So here, we'll select this ID and copy and scroll back down and create a string and paste the ID. And we expect the quantity : to be 1 because we did not change the quantity selector. So this basically checks that when we click Add to Cart, does our code run axios.post and give it these values. So even though mocks don't do anything, we can still check if we called them and we gave them the correct values. Next, we can also check if our code ran load cart. So remember that load cart is also a mock. So we can see if our code ran load cart. So down here, we can also expect load cart, and we don't give load cart any values. So we can just use .to have been called and brackets. So this just checks if our code called load cart and does not check what values we gave it. So now let's save, and vtest will run our code, and everything still passed. So that's how we test user interactions. We create some mocks, and then we check if our code ran the mock and gave it the correct values. So now let's save this into Git. In the Git section, we'll use the message test clicking add to cart button and commit. Before we move on, we're going to do some code cleanup. Notice that in each of our tests, we have some setup code at the top, where we create some sample data and mock load cart. So we can actually share this setup code between our tests. To do that, we can move these two variables outside of this it function. So we'll select this code and cut, and outside of this function, we'll paste. Now that these two variables are outside of this function, because of scope, these can be accessed anywhere inside this outer describe function. So that means it can be accessed in both tests. So in the second test, we can just remove this setup code because now it's shared between the two tests up here. Another recommendation is to recreate shared variables before each test, because if one test modifies a variable, that change is going to carry over into the next test, which can cause bugs. So before each test, we're going to recreate these variables. To do that, we can use before capital E each brackets, and we'll give this a function, brackets, arrow, and curly brackets. So before each runs some code before each test. And also we need to import before each. So at the top, we'll import before each from vtest. So we want to recreate these shared variables before each test. So we're going to do that in here. Inside, we'll use product equals, and let's just select this value and cut. And in here, we'll paste. And because we're modifying this variable, we need to change from const to let. And we'll also recreate load cart in before each. So here, we'll do load cart equals vi.fn and brackets. And above, we can remove this and change this to a let. So now, before each test, we're going to recreate the setup code, and we'll have a fresh set of variables. And this will make our tests more consistent. So now let's save. vtest will rerun our test, and everything still passes. So before each is known as a test hook. There are other test hooks that we can use to help us do some setup or some cleanup in our tests. So now let's save this into Git. In the Git section, we'll use the message use before each to remove duplication and commit. So we just learned how to create mocks that don't do anything. Now we're going to learn how to mock the implementation. Mock the implementation means we make the mock do whatever we want. To do this, we're going to test another component. So in our file, we're going to go to the home page component. And here, we're going to create a new file and name it homepage.test.jsx. And let's just copy all the imports from the product component test because we'll use most of them. So we'll select this and copy. And in homepage.test, we're going to paste. And this time we'll import home page from ./homepage. And as always, we'll start by creating a test suite with describe. And we'll name this home page component and a function. And we'll create a test using it brackets, and let's call it displays the products correctly. brackets, arrow, and curly brackets. And now let's render the home page using render bracket less than home page slash greater than. And the home page requires two props, cart and load cart. So for the cart equals curly brackets, we're not going to test the cart right now, so we'll just set it as an empty array. And for load cart equals curly brackets, again, we'll mock load cart. So above this test, we'll create let load cart, and we'll use before each brackets and a function brackets, arrow, and curly brackets. And we'll set load cart equals a mock function vi.fn and brackets. And we're going to give this mock to the homepage component. Next, the homepage component is special. If we open the homepage, notice at the start, we load products from the backend using axios.get/API/products. Again, in our test, we should not contact a real backend. So we're going to mock Axios. So here, at the top, we'll mock Axios using vi.mock brackets and the package Axios. Now, this just makes axios.get do nothing. However, in the home page, we actually need axios.get to return something because we're going to return a response, and the homepage is going to use this response to display the products. So here, axios.get cannot just do nothing. We need to mock the implementation, which means we're going to make axios.get do whatever we want. So in our test, inside before each, we're going to do axios.get.mock implementation and brackets. And we're going to give this a function, brackets, arrow, and curly brackets. So this means that in our code, whenever we use axios.get, it's going to run this fake function instead. So basically, we can make axios.get do whatever we want. That's what mock implementation means. So remember, we can give axios.get some values. Those values are going to be saved as parameters in here. So the first value we give to axios.get is the URL path. So in here, our fake function will also get the URL path. Next, inside our fake function, let's check if the URL path is equal to the string /API/products. So for the URL path /API/products, usually the backend returns all the products in an array. But in our test, we don't really need all the products. So let's just return 2 products to test with. So in here, we'll just return 2 products. Now, whatever we return from this fake function should match what axios.get normally returns. So axios.get normally returns a response with a property